What if the royal family you learned about never truly existed? What if the portraits, the family trees, the official timelines weren't records of truth, but carefully edited stories designed to protect power? Because royal history, as it turns out, was never just written. It was selected. Behind crowns and ceremonies lie gaps no one talks about. Missing names where heirs should be. Sudden changes in succession that make no sense. Scandals whispered about for generations, then quietly buried. Archives sealed for decades, letters destroyed. Faces scratched out of paintings, entire branches of royal bloodlines simply gone. This wasn't random, it was strategy. When a truth threatened the throne, it didn't get corrected. It got removed. When an heir complicated legitimacy, they were declared unfit. When a scandal risked collapse, it was erased from memory. And when history became dangerous, it was rewritten by those who stood to gain the most. Today, we're told monarchies are symbols of tradition and continuity. But continuity only works if people believe the story they're shown. So the story was cleaned, polished, simplified, and anything that didn't fit was quietly cut away. In this video, you'll discover how royal history was edited, why certain truths were hidden, and who benefited from those disappearances. Because some secrets weren't meant to fade with time. Some names were erased so completely, history pretended they were never born. Monarchies do not survive on power alone. They survive on belief, belief that the bloodline is pure, that succession is rightful, that the crown rests on destiny, not manipulation. The moment that belief is shaken, a monarchy begins to crack. That's why legitimacy has always mattered more than truth. For centuries, royal history was controlled by a small circle of power. Court historians wrote what they were told to write. Churches recorded births, marriages, and deaths, but only the ones approved to be remembered. Royal courts decided which documents were preserved, which were sealed, and which quietly disappeared. Ordinary people had no access, no way to question what was official and what was erased. When a person, a birth, or an event threatened the stability of the throne, removal became safer than explanation. A rival heir could not exist if records said he never did. A scandal could not damage the crown if it was never acknowledged. Over time, erasure became one of the most effective political tools in royal history. This video is not about rumors or sensational gossip. It's about patterns, methods repeated across kingdoms and centuries, real historical practices, real consequences, so the question is no longer if history was edited. The question is, how exactly does a royal family erase history? For most of history, royal families did not fear public opinion the way modern leaders do. They controlled it. One of their strongest tools was control over who was allowed to record history in the first place. Court historians were not independent truth seekers, they were employees of the crown. Their role was not to question power, but to justify it. Royal archives were tightly guarded spaces. Access was limited to trusted officials, clergy, and scribes loyal to the ruling family. These archives decided what future generations would know. If a document was never copied, it effectively ceased to exist. If a record was altered, no one outside the court could challenge it. History lived or died inside locked rooms. Literacy itself was power. For centuries, most people could not read or write. Printing presses, where they existed, were regulated or censored. Books required approval. Religious institutions, often allied with monarchies, recorded births, marriages, and deaths, but even these records could be adjusted under pressure. When church and crown worked together, official truth became nearly impossible to challenge. Because of this control, inconvenient facts didn't need to be argued against. They simply needed to be excluded. A rival heir's name could be omitted from a genealogy. A questionable marriage could go unrecorded. A scandal could be referenced vaguely, then never mentioned again. Over time, the absence of information became accepted as proof that nothing had happened. What makes this more powerful is when history was written. In many cases, official histories were not created during periods of chaos or conflict. They were written after a ruler had already secured power. By then, the winner decided the narrative. Victories were emphasized, rivals were minimized. Failures were reframed, threats were erased. Once that official version was published, copied, and taught, it became reality. Generations grew up learning a story that appeared complete, orderly, and legitimate. Few questioned what wasn't there because they never knew it was missing. This is how royal history was controlled, not through constant lies, but through careful selection. Not by inventing everything, but by deciding what would survive. And once the record was sealed, the past could no longer defend itself. In royal families, blood was everything, but not all blood was safe. An heir could be dangerous not because they were weak, but because they were too legitimate. A stronger claim, an earlier birth, or an inconvenient parentage could turn a royal child into a threat overnight. When succession depended on acceptance, even the rightful heir could be erased. Illegitimacy was one of the most common problems. A child born outside an approved marriage could expose affairs, secret unions, or political alliances that were never meant to be public. Acknowledging such an heir could destabilize treaties, anger powerful families, or undermine the authority of the reigning monarch. So instead of confronting the issue, the solution was silence. Birth order was another danger. In times of disputed succession, an older sibling could suddenly become inconvenient. If recognizing them risked civil war or rebellion, the crown often chose stability over truth. The heir would be quietly removed, and history would move on without them. The methods were rarely dramatic in public. Exile was common, sending a rival heir to a distant court where they could be watched, isolated, and forgotten. Religious confinement was another tool. Declaring an heir unfit for rule and sending them to a monastery or convent removed them from political life while maintaining a respectable appearance. Others were declared mentally unstable, a label that required no proof and allowed permanent confinement. Disinheritance was handled carefully. Legal language was used. Family councils were staged. Records were adjusted to justify the decision. On paper, everything appeared lawful and orderly. In reality, power had already decided the outcome. What followed was the final step, cleaning the record. Family trees were redrawn. Succession lists were simplified. The erased heir's name might appear briefly, then vanish entirely in later records. Future generations would see a smooth transition from one ruler to the next, with no visible disruption. This is why many royal successions look almost perfect. No conflicts, no rivals, no alternatives, but perfection in history is often a sign of removal. Behind those clean lines are lives pushed aside, so the crown could appear unquestioned and unbroken. Royal power wasn't only threatened by rival armies or rebellious nobles. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats were private. A secret marriage, a hidden affair, a child born at the wrong time, to the wrong person. In monarchies built on bloodlines, these were not personal matters, they were political explosives. Royal marriages were rarely about love, they were contracts. Alliances between kingdoms, noble houses, and churches. A single unapproved marriage could invalidate treaties, anger powerful families, or weaken claims to the throne. So when kings, queens, princes, or princesses married in secret, the truth could not be allowed to surface. Acknowledging it would mean admitting that the crown itself had broken its own rules. Affairs were even more dangerous. An illegitimate child was living proof of scandal. Recognizing such a child could raise questions no dynasty wanted answered. Who is the rightful heir? Is the reigning monarch legitimate? Was the royal marriage ever real in the first place? In extreme cases, one acknowledged child could unravel generations of carefully constructed authority, so silence became protection. Instead of honesty, dynasties chose disappearance. Secret spouses were denied recognition. Children were raised under different names, sent away, or quietly absorbed into distant branches of the family with no public connection to the throne. Some were acknowledged privately, but erased publicly. Others were never acknowledged at all. Over time, entire family branches vanished from official history. A royal cousin becomes a minor noble. A royal child becomes unrelated. A lineage that once had a claim to power simply stops appearing in records. Not because it ended, but because it was removed. This silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate and often coordinated. Churches were instructed not to record certain marriages. Court historians omitted references. Legal documents avoided specifics. And when future historians looked back, they saw only what remained, a clean, respectable lineage with no visible stains. In reality, Silence protected dynasties far more effectively than truth ever could. Honesty invites debate. Silence leaves no evidence to argue against. And when generations pass, silence hardens into fact. That's why many royal family trees appear strangely narrow. Few side branches, few acknowledged scandals, few mistakes. But power, like people, is rarely that tidy. When whole branches disappear, it's not because they never existed. It's because remembering them was too dangerous. When erasure couldn't be handled quietly through exile or silence, monarchies turned to a darker solution: removal from sight. One of the most effective tools for this was the label of madness. In royal history, madness was not always a medical condition. It was often a political verdict. Declaring a royal relative mentally unfit required no trial and little explanation. Once labeled unstable, an heir or family member could be stripped of rights, confined indefinitely, and erased from public life, all under the appearance of concern and mercy. The crown didn't need to prove anything. The accusation alone was enough. Many royal relatives spent their lives locked away in castles, remote estates, or religious institutions. They were kept out of sight, rarely mentioned, and eventually forgotten. Official records might note their existence once, then never again. Visitors were restricted. Letters were intercepted. Their names slowly disappeared from court life. For those who died under such conditions, the explanations were brief and convenient. Deaths were described as sudden illnesses, natural causes, or unfortunate accidents. Details were scarce. Dates were vague. In some cases, there was no burial record at all, just a quiet announcement, followed by silence. These disappearances created holes in history, years where nothing is recorded. Individuals who appear in one document, then vanish entirely. Family trees that skip siblings without explanation. To the casual reader, these gaps look unimportant. To historians, they are warnings, because power prefers certainty. And uncertainty invites questions. When a royal relative disappeared, the crown moved on quickly. Successions were adjusted, titles were reassigned. Official histories flowed forward without pause. The erased individual became irrelevant, not because they lacked importance, but because acknowledging them would reopen dangerous conversations. What makes these cases especially troubling is how normal they were. This wasn't rare behavior, it was a system. A method repeated across countries and centuries, refined to maintain order and prevent challenge. And so history remembers the rulers who remained visible, but forgets those who vanished behind walls, labels, and sealed doors. Their absence still lingers, marked by gaps that tell us something was removed, even if we're not told what. For centuries, the official story of royal families went largely unchallenged. The records were closed, the archives were guarded. And questioning the past was often seen as pointless or dangerous. But in the modern world, that silence is beginning to crack. Historians today no longer rely on a single source. They compare letters, financial records, church documents, foreign accounts, and private diaries that once sat ignored in dusty collections. When these pieces are placed side by side, inconsistencies emerge. Dates don't line up, names appear in one record but vanish in another. Entire years pass without explanation. These aren't simple mistakes, they're patterns. Family trees, once treated as sacred, are now closely examined. Altered lines of succession, missing siblings, and sudden changes in titles raise immediate suspicion. When a royal genealogy looks to clean, historians ask why. Who benefited from that simplicity, and who was removed to create it? Sealed archives are another red flag. Many royal collections remain restricted long after the political reasons for secrecy have disappeared. When access is denied without explanation, it suggests there is still something worth protecting. Every sealed document hints at a story that hasn't been told yet. Then there is DNA. Genetic testing has become one of the most disruptive tools in historical research. DNA doesn't care about titles or official narratives. It reveals connections that documents deny. In some cases, DNA has confirmed long-rumored illegitimate lines. In others, it has raised new questions about parentage and succession that written records never addressed. What these discoveries prove is simple, but unsettling. Erasing history doesn't destroy it, it only delays it. The truth waits in overlooked letters, in mismatched timelines, in bones, in blood. It survives outside official stories, untouched by propaganda or court approval. And when it surfaces, it forces us to rethink everything we thought was settled. Royal history isn't collapsing, it's being re-examined. And every crack in the official story brings us closer to the people and lives that were once deliberately forgotten. Power has never been satisfied with ruling land, armies, or people alone. True power goes deeper than that. It rules memory. It decides what is remembered, what is forgotten, and what future generations are allowed to believe. Royal families understood this better than anyone. They didn't just govern kingdoms, they shaped the past those kingdoms would remember. Royal history was never designed to tell the whole truth. It was designed to create stability, a stable bloodline, a stable succession, a stable story that people could accept without question. Truth was secondary. When truth threatened order, order always won. And so history became smooth where it should have been messy, clean where it should have been complicated, and silent where it should have spoken loudest. But once you recognize this pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. You begin to notice the gaps. The missing names, the sudden transitions, the unanswered questions buried beneath official explanations. And you realize that monarchy is only one example. Every system of power edits its own story. Governments do it. Institutions do it. Even modern narratives are shaped by what is allowed to remain visible. Questioning history is not about tearing everything down. It's about understanding how narratives are built and who benefits from them. When we accept official stories without scrutiny, we inherit not just knowledge, but bias. And when we ask questions, we reclaim the past from those who tried to control it. The erased were not insignificant, they were removed because they mattered. Because their existence threatened something powerful. And the fact that we are only now beginning to uncover these stories reminds us of how fragile truth can be when memory is controlled. So don't just consume history, examine it, question it. Look for what's missing as much as what's present. Because once you understand how easily memory can be shaped, you'll never see the past the same way again. And remember, if history can erase a royal heir, what else has been quietly removed? Share your thoughts in the comments, ask questions. And if you want to explore more hidden history, stay curious and keep looking beyond the official story.